Good morning, everyone. This is such a beautiful day. I can't think of anywhere else that I'd rather be right now than right here. And that's because we're going to have a beautiful day talking about electric vehicles and the future right here in Jamaica. My name is Audrey Williams and I'll be guiding you through today's proceedings. And so a very warm welcome to you to the launch of the IDB Lab and JPS Foundation's project to build a sustainable electric mobility ecosystem for inclusion and access. And that will be followed by a very interesting public forum on electric mobility. So I welcome all our participants here and those of you who are on Zoom, including Ramsey MacDonald, Deputy Chairman of the JPS Foundation, Therese Turner-Jones, IDB Country Manager, Michelle Gantois, JPS President and CEO, and the Honorable Daryl Vaz, Minister of Science, Energy and Technology. And they will be followed by some amazing panelists who are going to get into the whole business of electric vehicles and what that means for us. And a welcome to all of you who are watching us live, as well as those of you who are going to watch the recording after this. So now I'll just welcome our Minister of Science, Energy and Technology to bring his keynote address.
Master of Ceremonies, Mrs. Teresa Turner-Jones, the IDB Country Rep, Mr. Michael Gantos, President and CEO of JPS, Mr. Ramsey MacDonald, Deputy Chairman, JPS Foundation, panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Today is a great day for Jamaica. Today we plug into a dynamic and revolutionary industry, charting our way to electric vehicle readiness for a new Jamaica. I'm truly heartened to join this virtual public forum, which is a part of the Building a Sustainable Electric Mobility Ecosystem for Inclusion and Access project being led by the JPS Foundation and the Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB Lab. Ladies and gentlemen, the search is on to find clean, environmentally friendly, efficient, and sustainable energy solutions to power lifestyles in an increasingly fast-paced and connected world. I'm pleased that Jamaica has joined this global thrust, recognizing that innovative changes in the energy sector, and by extension its subsectors of electricity and transportation, are critical to fight against the ravages of climate change. Energy is an important part of our nationally determined contribution to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, as it recognizes that a shift to cleaner energy will reduce local air pollution and therefore benefit human health. In a country where the road and rail transportation has consistently accounted for more than 30% of the petroleum consumed, greater effort must be made to diversify our vehicle offerings while reducing our carbon footprint and dependence on imported fuels. The IDB states that if Jamaica's internal combustion engine vehicles fleet continues growing at the current pace, it will undermine all the gains being made to reduce oil consumption via energy efficiency and fuel diversification. E-mobility is a part of the bigger picture of building resilience, capacity, and sustainability in this country, and we have made steady progress in our development and policy approach. As you are aware, the IDB is supporting 2 of 3 phases of the Jamaica Electric Mobility Program now in progress: the Strategic Framework and the Fleet Assessment and Feasibility Study. The 3-year-old United Nations Development Program Global Environmental Fund project will also support sustainable transportation through electric mobility. These initiatives will form the groundwork for the 3rd phase, which includes the development of the e-mobility policy and the full implementation of e-mobility in Jamaica. We are making bold and strategic decisions pertaining to the e-mobility scenario that Jamaica will adopt. E-mobility is a significant part of the creation of a modern energy sector in the new Jamaica. Combined with renewable generation, e-mobility has arisen as one of the technological solutions with the most potential to reduce fossil fuel dependency within the transportation sector and to promote renewable energy resources penetration within the natural energy mix. E-mobility is therefore a key driver in the local and regional decarbonization and energy transition plans. In 2020, Jamaica hosted for the first time a high-level e-mobility stakeholder consultation in January and the fourth Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas ministerial meeting in February. E-mobility was a significant aspect of these international and hemispheric discussions, and both of these events deepened our collaborations with regional member states, development partners, and other stakeholders. These two events and the relationships which emerged from them further cemented Jamaica's place in the e-mobility sphere and propelled us further in our efforts. As a government, we are cognizant that electric vehicles are the future, and many global automakers have already begun ramping up their production. According to Bloomberg News Energy Forecast, by 2022, over 500 different EV models will be available globally, and over half of the passenger vehicles sold will be electric by 2040. We must move quickly in creating the legislative framework and necessary physical infrastructure. As we move forward with the legislation, the necessary infrastructure is also being built out. Under Component 2 of the Building a Sustainable Electric Mobility Ecosystem for Inclusion and Access project, the JPS plans to deploy 12 charging stations, with the first scheduled to be commissioned in April of this year. Ladies and gentlemen, I am satisfied that through our partnerships, both locally and internationally, Jamaica will not be left behind in this regard. Our national energy policy speaks to Jamaicans using energy wisely. I believe that the provision of electric vehicles will lead to greater efficiency in our energy and transportation sectors. Battery electric vehicles hold tremendous opportunities for our country. Not only do they replace the use of petroleum in transport, they also increase our citizens' participation in the energy sector. Many Jamaicans already have renewable energy generating capacity through their net billing arrangements, and adding battery charging capabilities to these systems will further strengthen their participation in the sector. More than 936 net billing licenses have been issued, contributing approximately 21.51 megawatts of capacity to the grid. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have entered the last decade towards 2030. From this point onward, it is not a marathon, but a Usain Bolt sprint to the finish. It is a time for acceleration of strategies and plans bolstered by robust policies, legislation, and of course, infrastructure. I reiterate the government's commitment to seeing this initiative through to the end because our future depends on it. Let me use this opportunity to recognize and thank the several stakeholders who have been attuned and supporting this national effort: the IDB, the UN, JPS, Automobile Dealers Association, and various government ministries, departments, and agencies, to name a few. So let's go and let's get fully charged for the road to EV readiness. I thank you very much, and good luck.
Thank you very much, Minister. We're certainly looking forward to all of those developments in the electric mobility landscape right here in Jamaica. We're looking forward to that. And now I'd like to introduce to you Ramsey MacDonald. He is the Deputy Chairman of the Board of the JPS Foundation. He is also the Senior Vice President of Customer Services at JPS and has served the company for over 17 years in a broad range of areas, including parish operations and corporate services. Please make him welcome.
Minister of Science, Energy and Technology, Honorable Daryl Vaz, IDB Country Representative, Therese Turner-Jones, JPS President and CEO, Michel Gantois, members of the Project Steering Committee, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Today marks the official public launch of an electric mobility initiative that supports innovation, stakeholder engagement, and sustainability. We are honored that the JPS Foundation was chosen by the Inter-American Development Bank as the executing agency for this electric mobility project, which is directly aligned with our focus on energy education and the preservation of the environment. And by electric mobility, we simply mean vehicles powered by electricity, electric cars, electric buses, you name it. It is important for us to take note of the focus of the project, building a sustainable electric mobility ecosystem for inclusion and access. This project is particularly important at this time as Jamaica prepares to join the rest of the world on the road to electric mobility. It is one of several projects being implemented through public-private partnerships to prepare stakeholders at all levels for the new opportunities that will definitely come with the expected transformation in the transportation sector. The Sustainable Electric Vehicle Ecosystem Project recognizes that electric mobility involves a lot more than the vehicles themselves or the charging stations that will be part of the support infrastructure. This project recognizes that people must be at the center of any transformation and that multi-sector partnerships are needed for sustainability. The main objectives of this electric mobility project therefore include the creation of opportunities for small businesses in the electric vehicle value chain, the training of auto technicians to work on electric vehicles, and the training of emergency personnel to respond to contingencies involving electric vehicles. It is our expectation that by the end of this 3-year project, more than 400 persons would have been trained, at least 15 innovative green businesses models supported, and some 50 new employment opportunities created in the renewable energy and EV sector. I believe the time is right for this electric mobility project. With over 4 million electric vehicles sold globally in the last 2 years, it is clear that electric mobility is part of the future. Not only that, but some car manufacturers have signaled that they will be ceasing the manufacture of cars with internal combustion engines. We have to get on board, and quickly. The environment and economic benefits of owning and operating electric vehicles will no doubt accelerate the demand right here in Jamaica in the next few years. One of the JPS Foundation's primary areas of focus is environmental sustainability. The Sustainable EV Ecosystem Project provides an opportunity for us to make a tangible contribution in this area. The negative environmental impact of emissions from traditional internal combustion engines cannot be ignored. Jamaica, like many other countries, has become even more committed to the preservation of the environment, especially when the health costs of air-polluted linked diseases are taken into consideration. It is therefore expected that, over time, Jamaican consumers will start gravitating towards electric mobility as they begin to appreciate the significantly lower net emissions from EVs. With increased cost sensitivity and sustainability concerns among consumers, there is no doubt that electric mobility will play a prominent role in our future, and Jamaica will not be left behind. This partnership between the JPS Foundation and IDB Lab will play a critical role in ensuring that Jamaica is ready. Ladies and gentlemen, as I close, I want to thank the men and women who have agreed to be part of the Project Steering Committee to provide oversight for the execution of the Sustainable EV Ecosystem Project. The Steering Committee is made up of representatives from a wide range of disciplines and industries, including finance, urban planning, renewable energy, legal, training and development, and transportation. I'm confident that Jamaica will benefit from the combination of expertise and commitment to national development embodied in this group. I look forward to the powerful partnerships that will be formed along the way. as together we build a sustainable electric mobility ecosystem for inclusion and access. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ramsey. I'm really looking forward to seeing what that new electric mobility sector is going to look like, and it's not so far off either. And now I'd like to introduce to you Therese Turner-Jones. She is IDB's country representative for Jamaica. She's the general manager of the Country Department Caribbean Group, CCB, which oversees the bank's operations in Barbados, Guyana, Jamaica, Suriname, the Bahamas, and Trinidad and Tobago. Please help us to make her very welcome. Thank you, Therese. It's all yours.
I agree with Minister Vaz that today is a very exciting day, and we are fully charged to be discussing electric mobility in Jamaica and in the region. Let me first acknowledge the Minister, Honorable Daryl Vaz, as well as Michelle Gantois of JPS, the President and CEO, other panelists, and of course, the audience and the listeners of today's event. Why are we here talking about electric vehicles? You'll recall that the minister mentioned that Jamaica has made commitments under the Paris Agreement. He referred to those as the national determined contribution targets. And a big part of meeting those targets would be the inclusion of electric vehicles. Just to give you some idea of what the transportation sector contributes to the consumption of energy in the Caribbean, we estimate that it's anywhere between 28 and 37% of GDP. That's huge. That's a big, big number. The transportation sector consumes more fossil fuels than any other sector. That's probably all you need to know from this entire seminar today. And in Jamaica, that number is approximately 30%. Given Jamaica's fossil fuel imports, the transport sector is an ideal target for intervention to lower the country's dependence on imported fuel, reduce the associated macroeconomic impacts of price fluctuations in oil, as is happening right now, save foreign exchange, and of course, reduce greenhouse gases, which is one of the commitments you've made under the NDCs. Additionally, the rising cost of maintaining and fueling JUTC's aging fleet, so all of those big yellow buses you see driving around Jamaica, nearly half of which are 10 years old or more, further exacerbate the company's broader operational challenges and embed their reliance on government subsidies to remain operational. So we see where there are many opportunities, not just to save on the costs, but also to shift a mindset. So shifting to electric vehicles, or EVs, as we're going to refer to them here in the seminar, the Caribbean can benefit from, according to Castilla, something like 2.2 billion over the next 20 years in savings and fuel savings. Barbados is probably a lot further along this road than many other countries in the Caribbean. And there, the government aims to achieve a 49%, so almost a 50% cut in fossil fuel consumption by electrifying 100% of its public fleets and vehicles by 2030. This will save the country something like $200 to $400 million in fossil fuel consumption. That's huge for a country the size of Barbados. Similarly, in Jamaica, I think everybody in this audience would know that the country is aiming for a 50% renewable energy composition by the 2037. So transforming the transportation sector is going to be critical to that. What we've seen globally and around the world, that despite the pandemic, market forces are driving electric vehicles transformation. And I think this is the really good news, and this is what was exciting for Minister Vaz. Global electric vehicle sales reached over 2 million, something like 2.3 million in 2020, which is almost 4 times what it was just 5 years ago. And that's according to the World Economic Forum of last year. The growth in sales is attributed not just to the fact that battery prices are becoming a lot more cheaper, but that implementing EV subsidies to help countries achieve their carbon neutrality targets seems to be the way a lot of countries are going. So we know from a Bloomberg survey, for example, that shows that battery prices are fast approaching cost parity to internal combustion engine vehicles. So if you think about the batteries we now use in our cars that we're driving that are not electric vehicles, internal combustion engines, a lithium ion battery pack the price of these batteries has fallen something like 90% since 2010. So from about $1,100 to about $137. So that's huge. And that is very, very encouraging for people who are thinking about buying an electric vehicle. So one of the countries that I think is most fascinating in this journey to electric mobility is a country like Norway. Now, Norway also happens to be one of those countries that is a great oil and gas producer, so they have a lot of oil wealth. But imagine that Norway itself is moving very fast on replacing their current stock of cars with electric vehicles. And over 54% of all the new cars sold in Norway last year were electric vehicles. And their idea is to have all of their cars move off fuel and diesel by 2025, which is less than 5 years away. That's pretty impressive. When we look at our region, sure, we're definitely lagging behind. But there are some reasons for that. So there's structural challenges and infrastructure gaps, such as limited charging infrastructure, as well as limited regulatory and fiscal incentives that are hindering EV growth in the region. And I want to put on record that the IDB office on 6 Montrose Road has an electric charging station. So if you ever buy an EV, please come in, you can use the charger that we have on our premises. So Barbados, we consider to be the earliest adopter here in the Caribbean. And they've managed to reduce import duties on EVs and to make them significantly lower than the duty if you imported a regular car with internal combustion cars. So 10% versus 45%. I think that is a huge incentive. Also in 2020, Barbados was the first to deliver 33 electric buses, public buses, adding to its current deployment of over 400 private EVs and 85 charging stations around the island. So that's really good news out of Barbados, and I think it stands as a model for what other Caribbean countries can do. So how are we helping? Meaning, how is the IDB and the group helping support e-mobility throughout the Caribbean, and also not just in the Caribbean, but in the wider Latin American region of which we are part? We have about 15 countries already working in some shape or form on trying to develop an ecosystem around electric mobility, similar to what we're doing here in this forum. First of all, the idea is to talk about these issues, and that's why we have an expert panel, but also to share with you some knowledge around why this is important and what we hope to get out of it. In Jamaica, if we took just a small percentage as a share of vehicles on the ground, private and public vehicles on the ground, if we said we wanted to electrify, say 12 to 15% of all the vehicles, we can look at saving about 2% of GDP, as well as reducing CO2 emissions by 3 million tons, while maintaining tax neutrality over a 10-year timeframe. So that's pretty good. And I'm really also pleased to say that the Ministry of Finance supports, through its fiscal regime, what we're proposing, so that there is, we have strong commitment from them on the way forward in how to structure a fiscal regime that would encourage electric mobility. And so, there is no gap in how we're thinking and how we're working with the Ministry of Finance on this. I think that's really important to say that. Just now, if you look around Jamaica, in total, there are only about 20 electric vehicles in use today. And so it's really important that we bring that number up and get as many here as possible. I'd also like to recognize and acknowledge the work of the Japanese government and their support in this. We have a $1.5 million grant that we're executing through IDB Lab, which is the partner of today's forum, with the government, as Minister Vaz mentioned, working on the fiscal and regulatory framework, how to deploy EVs, to understand the business model and how to raise public awareness, to reskill the workforce, and which we're hoping will eventually generate new ventures, new jobs, new interesting jobs, and highly skilled jobs for this new market, including recycling of batteries, and creating an enabling environment for electric mobility, an ecosystem with an emphasis on creating opportunities for SMEs in the whole electric vehicle value chain. This is super, super exciting. And just lastly, let me mention that we've been working with the Ministry of Transport and the JUTC on a small pilot to develop a battery electric bus pilot. So 5 of these. We're hoping that if that goes well, we can think about a bigger upscaling the number of buses that can run on electric platform. So I just want to say thank you again for JPS Foundation and MSAT for their support in taking the whole issue of e-mobility to a much higher level. I really like the way Minister Vaz puts it. We need to be charged up about this. Very good pun. But we also need to use this opportunity to inspire and generate interest in e-mobility, because we really think it's the future. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of this forum.
Thank you so much, Therese. That was really interesting, especially what you said about, buses, fleets going electric. I personally am very excited about that. I'd love to see that in Jamaica. And now we'll hear from Michel Gantois. Michel Gantois is President and CEO of JPS, and he has a wealth of international experience and a highly successful record in energy and finance. And he comes to share his thoughts with us today on e-mobility.
Good morning, everyone, and I'm very pleased to be part of a conversation we're having now on electric mobility, fully aligned, of course, with the JPS vision to lead and support innovation in Jamaica. Globally, across the world in the last few years, there have been a lot of disruption and transformation in the electricity sectors and in the mobility sector. And we've seen a lot of new opportunities for partnership, as well as investment, a lot of financial investments in vehicle electrification, autonomous driving, and these kind of technologies and ecosystems. Now, it's not just a global effort. We also expect that here in Jamaica, the Jamaican consumers will become increasingly aware and interested in electric vehicles. As they become more aware, not just of the environmental benefit, which are pretty obvious, but also of the economic benefit one day of owning an electric vehicles. Now, if Jamaica needs to be prepared, of course JPS needs to be prepared as well. And this project to build a sustainable ecosystem for electric mobility definitely fits with what we are doing today with the new JPS and our vision for the futures. Because we do transition as well from an old-style world, old-style utility, to a more modern energy company. And that's why JPS here, together with IDB as a counterpart, is happy to contribute almost $1 million over a 3-year period to support that project. That contribution will take the form for us of the rollout of standardized charging infrastructure across the island. We do believe that this kind of partnership is the way of the future. It's critical for the success of this kind of sustainable initiatives. The IDB partnership is both with public and the private sector. It's important for the advancement of electric mobility in Jamaica and in the world. It's a model that can be expanded to probably other ways of life, other projects. And as part of that infrastructure build-out, we, at JPS, we've already signed some partnership agreements with Boot and Texaco, where we will install some EV infrastructure across the islands. That opens a lot of possibilities for new business models, for new business ventures, for young entrepreneurs to come and play with us in that value chain and create jobs. Very important. So we really look forward to more partnership of this kind. It's part of a new phase of innovation in Jamaica, in the energy sectors, and we're very, very proud and very confident that everyone will benefit. It's a very important transition from the traditional carbon-heavy sectors to the sustainable world. And thank you very much for being part of that conversion.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Those are truly insightful remarks and something to really think about as we go forward in this sector. And now we go over to our panel discussion. It promises to be very, very exciting. I'm going to hand over to our moderator, Dion Nugent. Let me tell you a little bit about her. Dion Nugent, today's moderator, is a registered professional engineer and JPS's Director of Business Development. She is the technical lead and chair of the steering committee for the building of a sustainable electric mobility ecosystem for inclusion and access. Ms. Nugent has over 25 years of experience at JPS and has been an integral part in the introduction of LNG to JPS's generation fleet, the negotiation of 300 megawatts of power purchase agreements for several renewable and thermal energy projects, among other major programs. Dion, take it away. It's all yours.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Indeed, it's a very, very exciting day today as we look at our country and the development of electric vehicle technology on our island. I want to say welcome to your audience, and we're here in the JPS Innovation Lab, and we certainly are very happy that our audience online are still here with us, working through these challenging technological issues. And this is the first of several discussions that we'll be having on electric mobility that is being hosted by the JPS Foundation and by the IDB Lab. And we have been having an exciting collaboration with the IDB Lab as we seek to develop this sector. And as you can see, it's never easy. It's a rocky road at times, but that's where, when the rubber hits the road, those who are the leaders get going. So we thank you for being here today, and we want to drive this new sector. We want to have a robust conversation around it, and we want to be able to ensure that we are hearing your voice today. And so we have a distinguished panel of leaders here to discuss our topic, building a sustainable electric mobility ecosystem for inclusion and access. We want to connect the dots. That's what we want to do today for our audience. And we want to be able, through connection of these dots, to achieve the goal of transitioning our country, both in our public and private transportation networks, to battery electric vehicles. What about my sisters who are not just standing on the sidelines as it relates to electric vehicles? We believe that we must be working hand in hand, shoulder to shoulder with our male counterparts to make this happen. And so I'm very glad to be a part of the JPS team and the project team that is leading this effort here, and I welcome my other counterparts, both male and female in the sector. So we want to jump right into it. We're going to have two segments. We'll have segment one, which will focus on policy and infrastructure. And our second segment will focus on support systems and financing. And each segment will be about half hour. And our panelists in each segment will share their perspectives on the discussion topic. And then we'll open the floor for questions and answers. We invite you, our audience, to submit your questions online. We want to hear from you, your thoughts, concerns, issues. We want to see what you think about Jamaica transitioning to a sustainable electric mobility sector. So let's get the conversation started. I'm going to just introduce our 4 panelists in the first segment here. And to my extreme left is Mr. Fitzroy Vidal, Principal Director of Energy in the Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology. He has over 28 years of experience in the Jamaica energy industry. To my immediate left, we have Mr. David Barrett, Principal Consultant of NBAR Consulting, an energy and environment service consultancy, with more than 16 years of experience in energy. To my immediate right, I have Dr. Janet Dyer, Managing Director of Heart Trust NSTA. She's an internationally certified hospitality educator and trainer with over 32 years of experience. Love that. And to my extreme right, I have Professor Carol Archer, Head of Faculty of Built Environment, University of Technology, Jamaica, and she has over 25 years of experience in management, education, training, and research in a multidisciplinary and international setting. I welcome you all. Thank you for participating in the conversation. And we're going to start off, and we're going to ask everyone to do about 4 to 5 minutes just to give us your perspective on our topic today, which is building a sustainable electric mobility ecosystem for inclusion and access. Mr. Fitzroy Vidal, I hand over to you.
Sure. Thank you so much, John. And let me greet our panelists. There are also panelists here today. I want to also recognize those who are online. And I most certainly thank the organizers and the partners in this public forum. Formulation of government policy must take in consideration who, how, what, why, where, and when. And particularly, the overarching interest must be about the sustainable deployment of our natural resources for the benefit of society, the environment, and indeed the majority of our citizens. You heard Minister Vaz reminded of the government's commitment to implementing electric vehicle policy and infrastructure to support the national energy policy implementation and by extension the support that energy provides for the economy in a broader sense. Cabinet mandated the development of the electric vehicle policy within the context of the national energy policy, and you will all appreciate that our transportation sector touches the lives of everybody, not the public transportation space, or it is the private sector, or just common citizenry. Over 30% of our imported fuel goes to the transportation sector. Fueling largely internal combustion engine technology, which are now considered old by all spheres. And as we seek a transition from old technology, relatively unclean sources, and transition to a more modern economy, much of the emphasis to date has been on the electricity sector. And rightly so, because electricity, certainly in our context here in Jamaica, is what fuels our daily lives. It's fuel transition from archaic technologies and archaic ways of doing things to more modern ways of doing things. And now we have building out renewable energy, storage capacity, replacing old petroleum, liquid petroleum technology in the generation sector with natural gas, for example. Coal is no longer a factor in a significant way. That's on the electricity side. But this transportation sector, with some 30% or more of our imported fuel goes to has to come under scrutiny and has to be part of this transition. And so the development of this electric vehicle, electric mobility ecosystem and infrastructure is extremely important and timely, because whatever we want to say, when manufacturers tell us that after a certain date, 2030 to be exact, they will no longer be manufacturing internal combustion engines, then you don't want to be caught with your on the back foot. So to speak, you don't want to be caught where you are behind time and effectively become a dumping ground for those who would so easily offer these old technology to us. Government policy has to be far-reaching, it has to be transformative, and it also has to be one which facilitates participation of the broader society. And so other components of what the government is doing must be mentioned. For example, development of the urban traffic management system. You know what it is to travel to Kingston and the corporate area. The time that is lost, the productivity that is lost. And so the government is currently building out this urban traffic management system, support, of course, from our key international development partners, where from as far back as Angels in St. Catherine, and a little further, all the way through Portmore, St. Catherine, coming up through to beyond Kingston, Harborview, and the Bull Bay, that is, the entire fleet of traffic lights will be integrated into one system, an intelligent system that will be able to sense where the traffic is being built up, and release them, so to speak, so that the build-up is significantly reduced, allowing for greater commerce and commute, and also significantly ensuring that the productivity of the country takes a boost. Having said that, you will see that with the policy development that the government is pursuing, what we're making sure is that when we implement the policy, because it is so far-reaching and will be, then the infrastructure must be in place. And so, like other industries, there are times when government has to stimulate, incentivize the transition. You would have seen renewable energy taking off at such a rate. And I believe everyone will agree it is because of the incentives that the government offers, fiscal incentives, regulatory incentives that allowed for participants, whether it is grid-tied systems or individual systems, and persons are even now able to generate their own electricity resources from renewables and sell the excess to the JPS grid. Those who have been involved in large-scale renewables will know that once the power is available, JPS will take it and pay for it at the agreed rate. And so it was stimulated by the incentives the government offered. Well, similarly, government will have to look at what are those incentives that we must consider to give this new falling industry. There are going to be several aspects that must address: education, awareness, workforce transitioning, new industries, what happens to automobile industries or marketing companies. All these are stakeholders we must embrace as we give full consideration to the how we implement this new transition of to electric vehicle and electric mobility ecosystem.
Excellent introduction, and I think it's a fantastic segue to Mr. Barrett.
So, from what Mr. Vidal said, one of the things that should be highlighted is the fact that electric vehicles are significantly predicated, a principle significantly predicated on clean energy.
Yes.
So, who sits right in the sweet spot? The renewable energy sector, right? So we're right there, and whether it be private charging infrastructure, public or otherwise, the renewable energy sector is already engaged in many ways. So I think perhaps just for the time, there are three things I want to mention. One is that the opportunities for the sector will include retooling of competencies which are already in place. The second one would be new businesses and any kinds of collaborations which emerge. And the third one is recognizing that there's a circular economy that we can get involved in. So if we really think about the retooling aspects, what are renewable energy companies involved in? So they're involved in on-site distribution. Mr. Vidal mentioned this already. They're already very comfortable with very high voltages within the band of where EVs operate. They're already involved in codes and servicing, health and safety dimensions, and all those things which are involved in the future and now with electric mobility. Another thing in terms of core competencies which are already in place includes structural engineering, putting up those frames, whether on the roof or on the ground. That's already a core competence within entities. And the skill sets and academic training is already happening. I won't say anything much more about this, but you know, you have your UTEX and your HART and your UWI and Vector, for example, who are already involved. And these are in the renewable energy sector. So if companies transform these internal competencies, retooling as it were, then there's a bright future for the sector in EV. So we're talking about transferring electrical engineering specializations for generation, for transmission, for structure. Talking about turning structural engineering into something that looks not just physically relevant but beautiful. Carports have great dimensions, so you know the thought of parking your car or something that looks ugly is just not on. Certainly things like structural integrity assessment or services which are already in place. New businesses and collaborations, that's something that we can see very easily. The minister has already mentioned at a CREF meeting that 10% of Jamaica's transportation sector will be EVs. IDB mentioned perhaps 12%. We're happy if the number keeps going up. And so the fact is that there will be a large opportunities. Already JPS has spoken about 400 persons trained and you know 12 charging locations, etc., etc. So the possibilities are huge. In fact, it is mentioned that almost 34 million EVs will be around globally by 2040. I think is the number I've seen. So the way that I see it is that there are the opportunities, for example, for renewable companies that have deep pockets to join joint ventures with companies which are importing vehicles. In which case they can offer what I would call a charge to discharge service. The minute the car gets here, you can warranty that vehicle from the time where it's going to plug in, how long it's going to plug in, clean power it's going to get. The customer only has to be concerned about turning on that vehicle and going about their business. There's also the new opportunity, for example, of service providers for warranties. If we can transfer the knowledge base into servicing these vehicles, then that will overcome Jamaica's concern because you're going from a combustion engine to essentially electronics. So that's a shift. And the renewable energy sector, as I said, is already involved with current movements and voltages and so on. So that's a no-brainer. But how about warehousing and retailing? That's an opportunity for the renewable energy sector because, of course, batteries are going to be involved. Batteries have perhaps a 8 to 10 year life in the vehicle. And so you have to replace them at some point in time. Warehousing is going to be pretty important. So there's that opportunity. And then the third one being to support the circular economy. Jamaica is definitely green physically, but we are green in our business orientation. Now we definitely won't be left behind, and we're moving forward. And so things like the reuse of batteries is going to be very important because batteries at the end of 70% of their charge life will be taken out of motor vehicles, but they still have up to 50% to be commercial. So.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. I learned quite a lot right there, and I think that your comments on the renewal and retooling of competencies is an excellent transition to Dr. Daryl. as we look at the education area and training.
Having listened to my fellow panelists, we realize how critical it is for us at the HEART National Service and Training Agency to be able to train and maintain knowledge on electric vehicles. The emerging trend of electric vehicles requires training and certification of technicians with the ability to respond to this emerging field that's coming out there of electric mobility and the impact this mobility transition will have on our electricity system. With this comes not only the training of technicians, but the relative areas of our first responders, or occupational health and safety specialists, or transitionary persons from the combustion to the electrical automatum component of it. Or electric vehicles, it's going to pose a whole new set of training challenges from the body shop to the dealership. We are going to require unique and intricate training to manage the new techniques and expertise that will be required to diagnose and repair these autonomous vehicles effectively and safely. Now, from the HEART NSTA Trust perspective, we are in the preparation phase, doing our research and our consultancies to prepare our resources, both physical and technological, to respond to this emerging market. With this in mind, we have started our research and have come up with some objectives that we know will be relevant to us impacting training in that area. We are looking at creating the awareness of the EV market, the current and future trends that will come with this new and emerging field. The new market of EV charging services, looking at the technical and regulatory factors that will impact electric vehicle charging, the technical capacity and limitations of our electricity grid, how will our smart charging and discharging affect the sustainability of our ecosystems, and also the importance of training and development of specialized areas for maintenance and servicing of these vehicles. We have so far developed a draft course outline, and I'll just quickly run through the areas of the draft course outline that as we continue our research and our consultancies. I'm looking at EV market size and the developmental factors, which speaks to awareness, occupational health and safety, and safe working conditions. Charging infrastructure, which looks at the types of infrastructure that we're putting in place. Will they be standard? We'll be looking at our AC, DC. What are the locations for the structures? The trends in volumes and capabilities, and upcoming innovations. We also need to look at our grid impact of charging, the potential mitigation, both technological and regulatory in our training. Or electricity markets, that speaks to energy tariffs, energy products, whether we're going to be using green energy or whatever energy that we will be using. The demand and the responses for smart charging, looking at our current level of deployment, the legal, economic, and technical support that will be needed, and then the theoretical value of DR. Electric vehicle maintenance, how do we diagnose these vehicles? How do we document the traceability of these diagnoses? Installation and adaptation, how do we do those? And then looking at extending the digital thread of EV service and maintenance from combustion to full electrical vehicles. We have taken this step recently to begin training some of our instructors through a partnership that we have with the Shenzhen Institute out of China and the VCOM College also out of China through our World Skills partnership in optoelectronic technology. And this has allowed us now to be able to expand our PLC training capabilities. We have also now been able to understand some of the equipment that we will need for training and have begun the procurement process for some of these equipment that we will need for training. We are also now looking to integrate this training into our Jamaica German Automotive School. Once we're able to get that there for the Jamaica German Automotive School, then we will look at expanding the training through our partnership with our private providers. We currently have a partnership with the ATL Group. We are now seeking partnerships with other dealerships in Jamaica. We also are looking at consolidating our international partnerships along with our local partnerships that we have in Jamaica, so that we, as the National Service and Training Agency, are in that position to hit the ground running for training and certification of persons for this very important area.
Professor Archer telling us even more in terms of how we can get there.
Yes, thank you. Morning, and congratulations to JPS and the partners in achieving this very, very notable milestone. You know, when I was invited to be part of the panel, I said, oh, do you really understand that for me as an urban planner, someone looking at sort of the spatial location of this issue, I've always contended with the cars being the bane of our existence. As urban planners, we're always challenged. How do we deal with the motor vehicles in the urban space? We have, of course, traffic congestion, the pollution. As you know, vehicles contribute to 75% of our greenhouse gases. We have road accidents, and of course, there's increasing demand for land use when we figure in the motor vehicles. So here it is, we have the opportunity to address those issues, the congestion, the pollution, the land use. And we have the opportunity to address these issues through the concept of smart city or smart urban space. And what do we mean when we talk about smart urban space? This is the concept that relates to integrating the advanced technology to address infrastructure, mobility, education, healthcare, climate change, safety, security, and even decision-making, governance. So using the smart city concept, integral part of the smart city concept is that of renewable energy, clean energy, and the use of this to provide services, to advance technology for the smooth running of the city. So the electronic vehicle fits very well, neatly. But here's the challenge for small island developing states. Our approach to land use management is somewhat behind, but the opportunity exists. We were literally being now pulling, because of this new introduction here, to give some consideration to how we manage our cities. We have to then look at data. Right? So how do we make decisions? We have to look at how do we use the space, where to locate, how the infrastructure would be located, and use the various technology, for example, GIS, Geographic Information Science technology, to inform the use and the location and the management of electronic vehicles. The good thing is that we have extensive research available through developing and developed countries. So when you look at, for example, Amsterdam and Copenhagen, New York, and those cities, they have been deploying, managing, implementing charging station, using data to manage the rollout of electronic vehicles. So, and they have written extensively from the land use perspective. So we can look at those examples to inform how we integrate the use of electronic vehicles in our small island developing states. We also have research available through countries such as Brazil, Indonesia, and even as recent as in Barbados, that will help to inform the use, the location. Now, what we are seeing from the planning side is that, and it is encouraging because it says, look, given the fact that 57% of our greenhouse gas comes from the use of motor cars, transportation, here it is, electronic vehicles, especially the most recent studies coming out of Colorado, they concluded that the total emission of greenhouse gas, carbon monoxide, volatile organic compound is significantly reduced by the use of electronic vehicles. So we have the data that says, yes, we now need to move fast forward into the use of this technology. We also have the data that informs us as to how to locate the charging stations. So when we look at research coming out of Brazil and Amsterdam and Copenhagen, what we're seeing is that persons who have actually purchased and using these vehicles, they want to have charging station within close proximity. So their residential, their place of residence and their place of work. Yes, because there is this new concept called consumer anxiety range, which is not much different from when, you're running out of gas and you're trying to, get to the next charging station. So the data has informed us that we need to give consideration to locating charging stations close to place of residence, place of employment, and also place of various commercial activities, particularly the gas stations and malls, certain malls. We also, as small island developing states, we need to be mindful and take another factor into consideration, issues of vulnerability to disaster as we locate those charging stations. So I'm encouraged by the research that will be used to inform. But here are two things I will end on, and which is where Vidal started, changing the government policy. So we have to change and make adjustments to our transportation policy because, of course, it will have implication for how we, the gas tax, which is used to offset our transportation or road network. With that being reduced, with the use of electronic vehicles, we need to revisit that. Our land use policies, so we need to incentivize our developers who are building housing schemes to ensure that they make provisions for electronic vehicles, given the fact that world over, you see, most of the population are supporting charging stations within their residential. So I think the data is there and the support is there, and it really gives us the opportunity to advance our urban spaces. And I look forward to being part of the discussion.
Thank you, Professor Archer. We have had quite a wide perspective outlined this morning, this afternoon. And I just have time maybe for a few questions. And I have one question. You have really given a good state of play where we're at today. And we are considering how do we progress beyond this. So what are the things that I really want to understand? The policy and the incentives are there. We actually have started some of the progress, some of the implementation of systems. We have renewable business models being thought through and being considered and maybe in early stages of execution. The training is in place. The data is telling us a lot. The question is, how do we bring all of that together now to make tangible next steps for the next level? So policy normally drives that. Is policy really the most important next key element that we should be looking at?
I'd like a comment from each of the panelists. You know, we have, what do you think is that next big thing that we need to ensure is in place to drive the development of this sector?
Sure. So if I may go first, really brought us the breadth of preparation,
yes,
in the discussion just now. And the next step for us is to translate that data that is coming out of Brazil, etc., into Jamaica's experience. And so pilot projects are key to our next steps, right?
Okay.
And I'm aware of at least 2, right, very well thought out, very well funded pilot projects for which procurement are currently underway. And those pilot projects are seeking to bring in buses for commercial transportation, right? Because, one of the challenges that the Jamaican Urban Transit Company struggles with efficiency, struggles with costs, and much of the maintenance issues are related to the terrain through which these have to maneuver. Right. And so our pilot study will help us to get an appreciation for how all that data that is well researched will translate into the Jamaican space.
Yes.
We're looking at some cars as well, right? And we're making some of those cars available to the public sector and some to the private sector.
Okay.
Because we want the experience to be as broad as it can be. But I must tell you that the key players to make this happen are the automobile industry.
Okay.
The traders of used car vehicles, automobile association, they're the ones who are actually doing the imports. And much of the imports, and therefore we expect and are grateful for the interest that they have been showing so far and the anxiety that they have to get going. They just want to know what policy is, what is the framework in which we operate in, and they're just ready to start the transition. Many of auto dealers and the automobile association have indicated to us that come a certain time, they are no longer going to be taking in cars of internal combustion engines. They're going for electric vehicles. They just want a framework. So like the JPS, who is doing charging stations, other companies very interested in building charging stations, you won't have to worry about the demand for the use of those facilities. Because as the minister says earlier, we're asking everyone to get plugged in and get going.
Excellent. Thank you.
I wanted to say that private sector is going to be driven by market.
Okay.
Without that, nothing's going to happen. So how do we get those cars in? One, the policy has to be set in a way that allows people to have the confidence that when they bring their vehicles in, they're not paying much more or more than a regular combustion engine. So the transportation policy has to consider that. There are persons who have had challenges just trying to get a conversion between CC rating and kilowatts.
Okay.
That needs to be a no-brainer. In terms of generation, the energy policy has to ensure that EVs are properly incorporated in the renewable energy side of it, so that persons can plan to add generation and know that they can charge their vehicle regularly.
Okay.
The GEI, for example, also, and other agencies of the government have to be able to ensure that your system at home is installed up to standard, that you're not going to electrocute yourself by trying to charge your vehicle. Those are simple things that the consumer, when they take out their credit card, their wallet, or go to their bank, need to be happy about. And then in terms of the servicing of the vehicle, you want to know that you can take your electric vehicle to a service provider without an issue. There were years ago when we were changing over from leaded fuel to unleaded fuel, and people would take their cars, it was sputtering, it wasn't running well, and you know what the mechanics did? They cut off the catalytic converter. Because you don't need this, it's a spare part. But we don't want that kind of orientation, right?
Okay.
So building market confidence by causing the consumer to know they can operate an EV as comfortably and as confidently as they would have their gasoline vehicle is going to drive the market. Everything will open up.
Market confidence.
Market confidence.
Dr. Daryl. that big thing.
The big thing for us is creating awareness of the market, creating awareness of the EV mobility, see what comes from the pilot so we can hybridize the training, specialized to our conditions in Jamaica. So we put ourselves in a position where we are able to train persons to effectively maintain and service these vehicles.
Okay.
Definitely in terms of the policies. And the fortunate thing for us is that we are now at the position where we are looking at revising and upgrading our energy policy.
Yes.
We are revising the transportation policy, and we're also at the stage of upgrading our land use plans. So these are opportunities, and I know my colleagues at the various sectors in government, they are taking these things into consideration. And of course, in academia, we are usually ahead of the game in terms of the research and looking at best practices elsewhere. So I think the synergy, particularly from this grouping, for us to say, look, here are some research findings that we now can incorporate into our pilot or use to build out our policies. And of course, I do believe that we need to incentivize our developers, incentivize the auto industry, and of course our energy providers, because it is through these, if look, I'm going to ensure that we have clean air. There's a trade-off. So the incentives need to be put in place for that.
Excellent. Thank you so much for those feedback points. We'd like to take 1 or 2 questions from the audience. So is there a roadmap available to the public concerning the development of the sector? Should I look to my left? Is there a roadmap? I mean, is there, from your connections with the Renewable Energy Association, is there a consideration of a roadmap? Is there anything that we are all aligned around to get us there? And there's a quick answer on that one.
I would say no, but I would also say that I think JPS is playing a very key role in pulling all the pieces together to help us to get that roadmap. And certainly the actions by the Ministry of Energy is helping us to get on the way.
Excellent. So Mr. Vidal, that's sufficient, right? Excellent. So one of our comments is saying that, apart from policy, action is needed. And that point was made in terms of doing projects. We need to get pilot projects so that persons can see and feel that experience, right? And one of the things that we have been doing on the JPS side is focusing on the charging infrastructure, and that will be rolled out. We have been working through it. We have had our challenges with the pandemic, but we're very close now. And so persons will actually have a look and feel of what this charging infrastructure looks like, and we can bring in those electric vehicles. So I believe that the pilot projects is something we need to coalesce around. There's a question, will training be offered by heart to train us to service these vehicles?
I answered that question when I made my comments in the panel. Yes, training will be offered by heart. We are in the preparation phase now, and we are hoping that by mid-year, we should have a course outline ready and a curriculum ready in partnership with our providers to be able to offer our first set of training.
Excellent. I will be signing up as well. So question, what will be the source of electricity for these charging stations for JPS? The question is whether renewable or fossil fuels, and I will hear what Mr. Barrett has to say.
Well, I'm going to say renewable energy, but the alternative would be renewable energy.
I missed something there, didn't I?
It's twice as nice.
Well, the good thing is that we have an integrated resource plan that is pushing us into more renewables. So ultimately, I'm hoping that we can say up to 40% or
I
more.
will say that natural gas is a cleaner option too. But renewable is sweet.
All right, great. And I figured that's what you would tell me, right? And Professor Archer, you spoke about the land use and those sort of elements that support where you cite these kind of infrastructure. I'm particularly interested. I didn't see the question, but I'm going to go to that last question there. In terms of how does this integrate in terms of our building codes and going forward? I mean, should we be starting now or when?
Yes. In fact, we have had training in terms of our green building, which would have taken some consideration to locating these sort of charging stations.
Right.
And we've trained at least 25 persons at the within local government, and as part of the building code training, which we are getting ready to ramp up. That is being considered. But so there's the question of locating, but in terms of the building, but there's also the physical location, because of course, as I said, we are vulnerable to earthquake and flooding, and so we have to use our GIS technology.
Okay.
Include these indicators to be able to identify the optimal sites. But we do have the technology to do so. And we have the research to help to guide us.
I will be at your doorstep on that one. I am going to take one more question. Rochelle, using the Barbados model, are there any temporary incentives we can implement without regulatory or policy changes in the short run? And that was actually a follow-up question from what are some of the strategies to advance public charging to include the private sector that doesn't breach the JPS license. So I'm definitely looking to my extreme left on this one. Mr. Vidal, and you can give us a short answer to that one. We have segment 2 to run to, but I think we have really been doing very well. Sir Vidal.
Right, so in terms of incentives, I did mention in my opening statement that when you're spawning new industries, sometimes it's always good to have incentives to build out the rollout. Yes, those are under consideration, and I say under consideration, but you will appreciate that when we started this whole concept of moving to electric mobility, that was prior to COVID-19.
Okay.
And COVID-19 has changed the dynamic in so many respects. And the Minister of the Finance is the first to tell you how much the challenge is to balance the budget because of how the economy has been negatively impacted. Therefore, any program of incentives would have to consider broader revenue fallout. But I'm sure the government as a whole, who has interest in the development of not only EV policies, but remember that the country is interested in smart technology. So it's smart cities, smart transportation, smart homes. This is just one of the several approaches to bring our industry and our technology and our economy into the 21st or 22nd
century.
There you go.
As I wrap up, I found it, the point about, the policy incentivizing and the market appetite to actually have the sector grow. And I think that drives so much of what happens in terms of the training and the infrastructure development. It does say that the conversation has to continue, and we have to be working very closely together to actually advance those elements so that we have a coherent and orderly development of the sector. I want to close this section by really thanking my first 4 panelists. We have segment 4, again reminding everyone that this event is the first of several, so whatever we have not considered, we will be having follow-up conversations around them. And I think that we have learned so much about what's happening across the spectrums as to the development in EV. And it does say that the program has started and we need to get running at this stage. Thank you again, Mr. Vidal, Mr. Barrett, Dr. Dyer, Professor Archer, thank you so much as we transition to segment 2, as we look at financing and the support systems. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dion, and your body of learned panelists. I'm so excited. Like, I'm gearing up to buy my EV, like right now. But I do need to hear first from the second set of panelists because they're talking about support systems and financing. And we all know that's what makes the mayor go. So in our second segment, in terms of panelists, we have Mr. Duncan Stewart, Director of Stewart's Automotive Group, Earl Jarrett, OJ, CD, Justice of the Peace. He is the CEO and Deputy Chairman of the Jamaica National Group, and Mr. Stuart Barnes, NCB Branch Manager. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about our panelists. Mr. Duncan Stewart is the Director of Stewart's Automotive Group. He has over 30 years of experience in sales, marketing, and finance. Duncan has played an integral role in expanding the Stewart's Automotive Group of companies and has held several high-level positions, including Director and General Manager. He is also a Director of the Automobile Dealers Association of Jamaica. I'll now tell you a bit about Mr. Earl Jarrett. The Honorable Earl Jarrett is Deputy Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of the Jamaica National Group Limited. He is also Chairman of the Jamaica Automobile Services Association, which is a member of the JN Group of Companies. An ardent road safety advocate, Mr. Jarrett is a member of the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile. Please forgive any mistakes in my pronunciation. FIA, World Council for Automobile Mobility and Tourism North America, as well as trustee of the FIA Foundation from 2011 to 2020 and a member of the National Road Safety Council of Jamaica. And Mr. Stuart Barnes is Branch Manager, National Commercial Bank, Fairview Center, Montego Bay. Mr. Barnes is a member of the Board of Management at Church's Teachers College and a lecturer at the NCB Corporate Learning Center. And so, as you can see, we have a very, very learned, very experienced set of panelists coming up in this second segment of our panel discussions. And I'm going to hand over back now to our moderator, Madam Dion Nugent, who is going to take it away for part 2 on support systems and financing.
Thank you, Audrey. Welcome to our segment 2, where we are focusing on support systems and financing. And as Audrey has already introduced our panelists, we really want to thank Mr. Duncan Stewart, Honorable Earl Jarrett, and Mr. Stuart Barnes for joining us today. And as we did in the first segment, and I know that it was quite an exciting segment hearing the different perspectives, we are going further to hear from the automobile industry, business sector, and also from the finance sector. So we're going to give each of you 4 to 5 minutes to give us your perspectives. And remember, today is about connecting the dots as we develop the electric vehicle, electric mobility sector. So I hand over to Mr. Stewart to give us your initial comments.
Well, thank you so much, Dion, for inviting us today. Thank you to JPS, thanks to JPS. The dialogue that we're having now is very important for the development of this electric mobility. Mm-hmm. So if I could kind of, give a lay of the land, so to speak. Sure. So electric mobility is the future of mobility. The market of cars is going to change to electric, whether we like it or not. Yeah. But the time frame is fuzzy. So, some car makers have made bold pronouncements that by 2025, mm-hmm. Some have made commitments by 2040. Of course, electric mobility is, multiple faceted. We heard earlier when Therese Turner-Jones spoke about Barbados. Mm-hmm. So we have, the commercial applications, whether it is public transport, as Barbados has done with their bus system, whether it is, commercial transport for garbage trucks or commercial trucks, mm-hmm. or, whether it's some commercial application like the movement of tourists, movement of people via taxis. This is one application, and electromobility is very compelling for that application because of the high mileage, high fuel consumption, high cost.
Okay.
The other is, passenger vehicles for cars for you and I. And so, perhaps this is where we have to think about how do we develop this market. If we look at Jamaica, all of the rationale around electric mobility to do with climate change, to do with greenhouse gases, to do with tailpipe emissions doesn't resonate with the majority of our motoring public. And we have a uphill battle to take that message, to make it compelling and for it to become internalized by as many people as we can. I think, that the things that we spoke about today, many of the panelists spoke about, government regulation is important.
Yeah.
It spoke about, putting in place structures that will enable this new form of transportation. So from the car dealer's point of view, the message that we want to get across is that electric mobility is not just about battery electric vehicles. Electric mobility includes plug-in hybrids. Electric mobility includes mild hybrids. And if we look at the supply chain, what we're going to see is that right now, plug-in hybrids are available in the market. We already have them on the road, sold by the dealer network. You can go into showrooms and see plug-in hybrids. But battery electric is coming. And when I say coming, I'd say coming this year.
Okay.
So you will be able to go into a dealership and see battery electric vehicles this year. But you will not have the range of choice that you're accustomed to. And this is mainly because of the trade-offs related to battery size and weight and vehicle design of SUV versus passenger car. How does that impact battery choices? So, you're more likely to see a vehicle that is a crossover or a hatchback style car than a full-blown, full-size SUV that Jamaicans favor. So what that means is that people who want to adopt battery electric vehicles this year are going to have to make consumer choices like choosing a smaller vehicle.
Okay.
And that's not a bad thing. That's good for the environment. It's good for climate change. And we need to get that message across by allowing people to experience these cars and see that they're able to do what they are able to do now with these cars. The other thing that we need to look at is that the taxation on electric cars at 30% versus 45% is not compelling enough to make the price point attractive. So if we want battery electric vehicles to be adopted in the market, we're going to have to look at where pricing is.
Okay.
And our perspective is that taxation around 15% will drive adoption of battery electric vehicles when they come to market. The next thing that we have to look at is surrounding standards for charging. So, we have a very complicated supply chain in Jamaica. We have imported used cars from a variety of source countries. We have, vehicles coming from the manufacturer's representatives. And, they all have different charging standards. And we need to be careful that we have the right fast charging standard, because the time that it takes to charge is going to be one of the single biggest impediments to people adopting cars. It takes you 10 minutes to fill up at a gas station. A fast charger is going to take an hour and a half. A slow charger is going to take 6 to 8 hours. So what it means is that people who adopt battery electric vehicles have to be quite deliberate around how they fuel their vehicles. And so standards around what charging is available is very important. And then we heard, from the previous panelists, how important it is for us to have training, how important it is for us to have emergency services, understanding high voltage systems. So the fact of the matter is that these cars are much simpler than internal combustion engines, but they are different. And this difference poses a safety issue. And this safety issue means that when you approach a car that's been in a serious accident, you can't just touch the car. Okay. You have to be mindful of what's going on with this car. And how would emergency personnel tell the difference between an internal combustion car and a battery electric car? Because it won't be obvious. So, this training that we discussed about, HEART NTVA, getting it into the curriculum, and I'm really glad that the IDB JPS Foundation project is tackling that head on, because it's really important. And then if I could close out, what's important, I think, is the communication as we go forward. So the IDB is funding, several pilot projects that will deliver information around total cost of ownership. Will let people understand why is an electric vehicle better than an internal combustion vehicle. And it's important for that to be communicated to the market. Right. The dealers have a part to play in that. We are a quote-unquote experience center. So people are going to come to us to understand what electric cars are about. And we need to make sure that this information that comes out of the projects is available to the public.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sir Stuart. That's a lot that we have just got there. And I know, Mr. Jarrett, you're going to give me a lot more for me to consider.
We're going to keep it tight. Dion, I must recognize and thank JPS and the IDB for convening this and to officially launch the introduction of electric vehicles in Jamaica. It's good for Jamaica, it's good for the economy, it's good for our climate and our health of our people. And mobility, as you have heard earlier, represents over 30% of the GDP of our country. I must share with us, though, that electric vehicles were invented in 1828. But they could not compete with the oil and gas industry, where you had a greater infrastructure network. You heard a while ago that it takes 2 to 3 hours to charge a vehicle, or 6 hours. You just get your gas in, 10 minutes. So they couldn't compete in those days with that industry that had emerged after Henry Ford produced his Model T Ford, which was done by using modern technology at the time. One of the disadvantages of electric vehicles then and now was the range of the vehicles. When you travel from, and Jamaica has a big hill that cuts the country in half, and therefore you're going to need a lot of energy to cross the highways to get to the north coast. And therefore you're going to need to have charging points across the island if somebody's going to effectively use an electric vehicle to travel Jamaica. And that is an obstacle that we have to defeat. But then that is also an opportunity to build out an architecture to support the electric vehicles. And that's an opportunity to create some jobs across the country in that process. Those jobs that are created, and I imagine over time it will be a few thousand jobs. We hear that just in the pilot phase we could create some 50 jobs. But if you think about this thing going over time, you could be creating thousands of clean jobs for persons in Jamaica. And we need to look at that aspect as well. Duncan mentioned, and earlier in the panel mentioned the training of mechanics and emergency response personnel. That is critical. Yeah. As he said, if you were in a crash and to be extracted from that crash vehicle, you can't just have the old-time Pete, the mechanic, come with his screwdriver and apply it to the car. Otherwise, Pete could be fried. And so we have to now train people as to how to deal with electric vehicles, how to deal with these vehicles in the event of a crash. How do you deal with the persons who are occupants of the vehicle? And of course, there are additional risks. You're driving on top of a lithium-ion battery, which in some instances we have seen how they react to crashes and impact. And so therefore we have to think and plan for that. But on the good side, the electric vehicles will impact positively our environment. Will allow us to meet our commitments under the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations and the commitments we have made with our multilateral partners around the world. And so if we're to reflect on the health side of EVs, the reality is that Jamaica, whilst maintaining our standards, are operating below the standards for air pollution. That is only in the aggregate sense. When you get to certain cities, for instance, in Jamaica, we measure air quality in places like Halfway Tree and Crossroads where the buses converge. We're not doing so well in those smaller areas, but nationally, our air quality is quite good. But as you know, in Jamaica, we have a high case of respiratory diseases. Almost every Jamaican suffers from asthma. And in 2017, we had 1,230 persons dying from respiratory or illnesses caused by air pollution. And what the electric vehicles will do, particularly if we're able to transition to public transportation, buses and taxis, is that you could find a reduction in the deaths caused by, on hospitalizations caused by pollution. And one needs in the policy formulation to consider the cost associated with hospitalization and medical care compared to the cost of the infrastructure that we're going to build up. And also there's an opportunity for the private sector to participate in the infrastructure building. And if you were to go to London today, you'll find your taxi comes up and it's making no sound. It's typically a hybrid vehicle. And so in the policy formulation, we probably have to look at whether public transportation, whether we should mandate that the taxis be hybrid or electric vehicles. And those are considerations that we should take. We also need to look at JUTC and the buses that we have in the country, whether we should move as many larger cities have done. If you go to New York City, the MTA, the buses are electric buses or hybrid buses. And if you go to South America, many of the cities in Argentina are using electric buses. That is a policy decision that we need to have the government consider. And not just consider, we need to sort of press the government to move in that direction. Electric vehicles have advanced over the years since 1824 or 1828. Today you have some great vehicles. Duncan has a couple in his arsenal there. I mean, you know, the British High Commissioner is waiting for his eyepiece. And other manufacturers have also developed great vehicles which will be acceptable, I believe, to the public. And I remember visiting New York City, and a friend and a colleague, a business partner, he invited me for a drive in his electric vehicle. I won't call the name since Duncan is here, but it was very, very fast and very, very quiet, and had a lot of features in it. You know, approached the car, saw the car coming back. He just, from his mobile device, instructed the car to come back, and the car was already at the right temperature because it was all built into the systems that were being provided for the electric vehicle. And so I have no doubt that the public will find it attractive. But the point that Duncan made about the duty rates needs to be fully addressed. And he's probably quite right when he says that maybe 15% or even lower to get it going will be appropriate. So that is something that we have to press the government to look at the duty regimes around electric vehicles. On the sports side, at the FIA, for a few years now, we've been running Formula E to show the public that you can have sport with an electric vehicle. It doesn't have to be an internal combustion vehicle. And so far, the Formula E is done quite well. Granted, you sometimes need to have two cars because when the battery runs out, you need to switch to another car. But it's working well so far, and the cities in which it has been applied or introduced, the communities have welcomed the EV, electric Formula E. And so what I'm saying here is that electric vehicles is not a boring solution. It is quite good, and as the technology grows and as people invest more, you'll find even more attractive vehicles coming out with greater levels of performance. You get increased luggage space because you don't need the space that is required in the front and the back. So you get literally two trunks, one in the front and one in the back for the vehicles. And so therefore it is something that we should look forward to. And I know the manufacturers are actively working at it in some countries, in some states. There's a mandate for vehicles to become electric vehicles, California being one such state, which is pressing for at least hybrid vehicles to be introduced over time. So there are many opportunities ahead. And of course, it is all surrounds the policy framework that we put in place. I'm happy that the minister mentioned that his electric vehicle policy is coming through. Yeah. But there are certain things that we have to think about as we go forward. How you deal with insurances for the electric vehicles. How you deal with we spoke about the repairs of the electric vehicles. We spoke about the customs duties. And also the incentives that we should put in place. Should we make it that the toll roads are free for electric vehicles? And parking is free for electric vehicles, to introduce it and to get it accepted by the public at large. The funding for the infrastructure, I'm certain the IDB will be happy to provide funding for the build out of the infrastructure. And of course, the payments for the charging of the vehicles is something that we have to also think about. We heard just this week of the government's plan to introduce digital currency that is ripe for purchase of the electricity at the charging points. And as well, we have to also look at the policy that surrounds how JPS works, because you can't then have somebody selling electricicity if they're not so approved.
Indeed.
So with that, I close off.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jarrett. And I like the idea of the toll road free for electric vehicles. I think that that's something we can possibly explore. I now turn to our third panelist, Mr. Stuart Barnes, as he gives us his perspective from the finance sector. And as we spoke about, just touched it, insurances, financing, these sorts of, and we have had rich perspectives on the support systems and financing. And just a few questions, and we invite questions from the audience once more. One of the things that I'm particularly interested in is how do we see, from your perspective, this sector developing? So I have had the challenge of trying to forecast how many vehicles we're going to have and prepare for the growth of the sector. What do you see this growth looking like over the next couple of years? And I know you have mentioned the issues of government incentives and duties and the safety codes and so on, but how do you see this happening over the next 5 years? Is this real or is this just a pipe dream? Is it really going to happen? I'll turn to Duncan. Your comment first.
So, I mentioned before that the supply chain is going to force electric cars down it.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
And this is happening because of emission rules in developed markets are forcing manufacturers to make the switch.
And you're feeling that right now? You're feeling that as well?
In the next 5 years, we will feel it. Right now, we're not.
Okay.
But for example, many countries in Europe have banned the diesel engines from 2025. So that will mean that we won't be able to buy a diesel engine car for some makes, just because of something happening far away from here. So the electric market is going to come to us because of the supply chain, no matter what.
Okay.
However, as I'd mentioned before, the market isn't going to select electric cars except for a certain client segment or customer segment.
Mm-hmm.
And unless we can sway opinion around the switch to electric cars, we will see slower adoption at the start and having it pick up at the end as we are forced to do it. As I mentioned before, plug-in hybrids are part of the manufacturer's strategy. Plug-in hybrids, combine an internal combustion engine with an electric motor and a battery. And the notion is that you could do your commute using electricity, but you would take your long drive using your engine. So we are also going to see plug-in hybrids forced upon us by the supply chain.
Okay.
So, I think that in this year, you could easily envision 200 to 300 electric cars being in Jamaica if you count plug-in hybrids. And if you counted battery electric only, then perhaps you would be looking at under 100. But I think that this is something that will have exponential growth.
Okay.
So it would be easy to envision, doubling the volume each year.
Okay.
As people become more accustomed, as the choice widens, and as the supply chain forces it upon us.
Excellent. Thank you. Mr. Jarrett, your thoughts?
And if you look at the life cycle for a car, it's roughly 10 to 15 years. And in that period of time, you tend to find, cars die and new ones are put in the market. And I think that, unless the government, it all depends on the government, because the government continues to allow Jamaica to receive cars from countries that are forced to change their cars, in other words, the used car market. If you allow a country to accept cars at a lower standards, it may take a little longer.
Mm-hmm.
But it all depends on the government and government policy, and which I would encourage the government to look to EVs, combination hybrid vehicles, as a means by which we're going to preserve our environment, meet our commitments to the multilateral agencies and the international community. So it all depends on government.
Government incentives, government policy are critical to make this happen. When do you think this will actually begin to trickle down to the ordinary man? One of the things I believe is a sure indicator of whether electric vehicle begins to move is when I can jump into a EV taxi. How do you see that actually happening, getting down to the ordinary Jamaican person?
There's a policy paper which is being prepared by the ministry. I think after that it's going to be circulated to key stakeholders. And we have a discussion in Parliament and so on. So it could take a couple of months, but it will give us an opportunity to push for the public to participate in the development of the framework that will drive this industry. And it will impact a number of persons. As I said, mobility and transportation is a third of the economy.
Early adoption needs some kind of incentive. And when you look at the rate at which the vehicles are being purchased right now, you find that people get sentimental with the old IC vehicles, and they tend to prefer them because they're not certain about how it will equate in terms of value. So when you look at the value proposition, they are looking on what will I gain when I invest in this vehicle. So, tax incentives are stuff that they're going to be looking on. The bank's going to be looking on that as well, because that's going to be a selling point. And also the support services for the EV readiness, the support services to have this ecosystem. We would need to see, or would love to see, some kind of incentive for people to be early adopters, because when you look at the plan for EVs in the next 10 years, in the next 20, 30 years, there are going to be more EVs than the regular combustion engines. And, you know, as Duncan said, you really don't want to be caught in a situation where you're lagging and you end up with vehicles that are not ones that you can get the parts for early. So as a result of that, I think that when we incentivize, we get people becoming early adopters, and we can accelerate this whole transition into EVs and hybrids.
As we wind down on this sections, one of the things that a lot of people have expressed interest in is what are the developments in terms of businesses and employment opportunities in this sector. How will this sector in its growth affect existing business models, if any at all? I was talking about how we grow businesses, this, this small man, middle-sized businesses participating in the sector. And is that something that we see as critical to develop at this point in time? How do we need to position ourselves to encourage that? Because I know that for the sector to grow, that those layers of the economy have to feel connected to the sector. It's a difficult one, but do you have some thoughts on that one?
Absolutely. So, we have a relatively high cost of transport in Jamaica.
Mm-hmm.
And so, this filters down into economic activity as a cost. And, electric mobility will deliver more efficient energy,
mm-hmm.
and will deliver lower transportation costs, provided that the first costs of the vehicles are acceptable.
Okay.
So if you were to think about somebody making the choice of using an electric van versus a diesel van,
mm-hmm.
They would be able to save maybe 20 to 30% of their fuel costs using an electric van.
Mm.
So, this was the kind of multiplier effect that I think Teresa Turner-Jones spoke about with 2% GDP growth. In addition to that, we are talking about building out a new infrastructure, and Earl alluded to this earlier. So every new electric car that we sell, we have to put in place a charging infrastructure,
mm-hmm.
and maybe more than one. So, so you're going to see small electricians have work to do to
mm-hmm.
install chargers at homes.
Right.
And, because this is an exponential thing, right? It's not that we install 200 and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
It's every single year we'll be installing more
right.
and more and more,
right.
as we, replace out the existing aging fleet.
And that for me resonates, because a lot of persons are wondering, what is in it for me beyond the vehicle? And I think that if we can communicate that business opportunities exist, that we must begin to position ourselves for, I think it will certainly assist and support us advancing the development of the sector. Mr. Jarrett, your thoughts?
With what Duncan has said, but when you think about electric mobility, don't just think about the car. In Indonesia, you have electric bikes.
Yeah.
And so what you're doing with this mobility policy is to look at mobility in its totality. So you will have jobs which will be created for persons, delivery people who today may not be happy with, the yang. Would be certainly happier with a scooter that's electric. The repair of those vehicles and also the spin-off additional industry that will come out. You talk about the payment services, I mentioned that earlier. how do you pay for electricity, how do you deal with the charging points, what's the protocol that works with these new charging points. As Duncan points out, in your homes, you can plug in your electric vehicle, car or bike and get a charge, and you may have to do some kind of electrical modification to accommodate that. So I see this is no different from the United States when they built that freeway system, where it creates so much economic growth that we are today not able to even imagine what some of the growth will emerge. And so what we need to do is to embrace this new world. As I said, to create thousands of clean jobs. There's another word that goes in between clean and jobs, but I won't say it here. But so it's a new world, and we need to embrace it and look forward to it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I'm closing off now. I was about to take a survey how many persons in the room drive an electric vehicle. Duncan, do you see any hands? No. We're at the beginning. No hands as yet, but it does say that we are a lot closer in terms of understanding the issues and the parameters that surround the EV. I can tell you as a female, I have been thinking about it, and I've been doing a lot of circular thought about it, and I believe that we can communicate that there's certainly a lot of value in terms of the environmental benefits, the fuel economy, and of course, just I would say the satisfaction of the ride in a vehicle like that. I think it's something that we can definitely promote and encourage. I'm just seeing the questions on the board, and I think we may have considered some of them, like some manufacturers seem opposed to third-party maintenance. Do we expect this sentiment to be prevalent? Could this pose an issue with maintenance in our market? Do you see any issues with maintenance, Duncan?
So electric vehicles have much less maintenance than internal combustion and plug-in hybrids. Car makers during the warranty period are always going to prescribe their authorized network. So it will be no different for electric cars and ICE. But I think, you have to envision a vehicle that has no oil changes, right? Very little cooling fluid to change. That, servicing is about wiper blades and the pollen filter that's filtering the air in the cabin.
And brake pads.
That, brake pad life on an electric vehicle is 3 times longer than the brake pad life on a ICE because you can use the electric motor to slow the car. So it's a different maintenance paradigm than what we're accustomed to. In fact, one casualty might be that technicians have less work to do.
Okay.
Or they do something else.
Or they do something else. And that's one of the things that's certainly very attractive to me as a lady, that I have less maintenance work to do. And again, we're looking for those nuggets in the development of the sector that we can encourage our nationals to really take on electric vehicle as a part of their day-to-day experience. I want to thank you all for your time today. Thank you. A lot has been said. We have heard about what is critical to incentivize the sector. Government policy is critical. Duncan, you have spoken about the fact that as Jamaicans, the equivalent EV might not be the same size as the one you typically go after, but certainly there are a lot more benefits that we can enjoy. We have to look at our government policy to incentivize the sector. And from the automobile industry, we're saying that, it's not just about electric vehicles, it could be the plug-in hybrids, and there are other variants that we must be able to consider. Mr. Jarrett, you spoke about the fact that we must really continue to look at the benefits of it in Jamaica. And the good side is that, the impact on our environment the opportunities to transition our public transportation, buses and taxis into this sector, the private sector helping that rollout as well. And of course, you spoke about the sports side, which I loved, about the the Formula E, and I would love to see Jamaica doing some Formula J. Let's see how that works out. And Mr. Barnes gave us his view in terms of the financing institutions are watching the growth of the sector, and they're positioning themselves also to support and to finance the business that would come forth, and even on the electric vehicle side. So today has been the first of several events, conversations around EV. It's certainly not the end of the conversation. JPS as a team is also working on supporting the infrastructure development. We're working on the rollout of an island-wide network of charging stations. Stay tuned for that. And as we close today, let us continue to work at building that sustainable ecosystem around electric vehicles as we look to our tomorrow as a nation and as a leader in the development of technology in the world. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us today. And I hand back to Audrey, who will just give final remarks.
Thank you so much, Dion, and all our panelists. Wow, what a session we've had. It's been eye-opening, it's been inspiring. I'm personally going to get my EV. According to the stats, by 2022, we will have 500 models. That's next year, though. By 2029, we're looking on parity with pricing. I'm very excited about this future. And as she said, this is going to be just the first discussion in many more to come. So there's lots to look forward to. Thank you all so much for participating, for being here with us during this panel discussion and launch. We are looking forward to an exciting future. Have yourselves a great day, guys. And we're looking forward to that electric future. It's going to be electric.